Big welcome to our live audience for the Digital Health Investor Talk show. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me at x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of NextGen consumer tech is revolutionizing care. And it's with Maheen Adamson, a professor at Stanford and the CEO of Soof Solutions, a company that helps people communicate using vision neuroscience. This show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called The Digital Health Investor Talk Show. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify, and leave us a review. We always love getting reviews. We have new podcast links for the show, so make sure that you see recent episodes when you subscribe, or you could be on an old page of the old podcast. This is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of today's show. It's 90 minutes long, and Maheen and I will spend the first part discussing the news and the macro picture and other topics that affect digital health. And then we'll focus on our special topic of the day. And we'll be taking your questions throughout in the LinkedIn text chat. So, Maheen, welcome to the show, and please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So, my name is Maheen Adamson. I have a PhD in neuroscience and a master's in healthcare leadership. I am currently the CEO of Soof Solutions, which is a company that uses vision neuroscience to help anyone who cannot communicate speak through eye tracking. I'm also a clinical professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University, as well as I serve as a director of research for a women's health center funded by IVA in Palo Alto.
Wonderful. Well, welcome to the show. So the first section we'll focus on it is macro news, and that's about recent macro news and what the macro picture is looking like. And in the old days, it was always good news, and so this didn't matter so much to digital health leaders. And now it seems to matter a lot more, and it's not always good news. And so the first is that perhaps surprisingly, the NASDAQ is at record highs. It's at 21,000, and it's seen a relatively steady climb up with some setbacks over the last few months. And today, the Fed concluded its periodic meeting and announced that it was holding the federal funds rate flat at the range of 4.25% to 5%. And so this reflects that they're still concerned about inflation. Inflation was too high in the recent past. And it also reflects that Trump's new policy of tariffs of the last several months is inflationary. And so they're not willing to cut rates in the face of a new federal inflationary policy. Apparently, I saw in a headline that the Fed vote was relatively divided. So there's different Fed board governors, and some of them are saying it's time for rate cuts. This comes in the highly unusual circumstance of Trump repeatedly criticizing the Fed and criticizing Fed Chairman Powell and saying that they should be aggressively cutting rates, which might be good for the economy, but would end the Fed's policy of fighting inflation. It would come at the cost of likely sustained high inflation or greater inflation, which is why the Fed is pursuing what it's doing. So this is sure to leave Trump frustrated that the Fed has gone for another regular meeting without cutting rates. And today the NASDAQ was down a little on the news that the Fed was not cutting rates. And that could be because they expected that after a few meetings of not cutting rates, the Fed finally would cut rates, and the NASDAQ was a little disappointed on that. So I think that's a summary of this, but it's not, it's within expectations, and it's not necessarily bad news because inflation still has to be fought. From the perspective of young companies that want to raise money, we would like to see the federal funds rate cut and money supply eased and the economy grow faster. But the mix of news of late has not been terrible. So, Maheen, do you follow these sorts of numbers, and do you have any thoughts on what this? Well, let me just throw in one other thing, which is that the Department of Commerce also today reported that for the second quarter, the economy grew at 3%. And this was compared to the Dow Jones and just a general market expectation of 2.3%. So that is a significantly higher than expectation. And that's generally good news. We generally like a faster growing economy. And also that So we're in an economic cycle, and in an economic cycle, you never get to skip a recession. There's expansions and there's contractions, and we would all love that the biggest brains in the Fed and in the Treasury are always thinking about how do you just skip a recession, and you never get to skip it. You always have to pay the price at the end of an expansion with a contraction. Yet here we are. And we may have skipped a recession, it looks like, because we're seeing this higher growth rate. Technically, a recession is two contractory quarters in a row. Well, we just had an expansionary quarter at 3%. And on the All In podcast, which a lot of people follow, they're wondering, did we skip a recession? Is that what just happened? We skipped a recession, and this recession was due to have fallen in Biden's term, but we didn't see it in Biden's term because we were spending on two wars. So massive fiscal spending can postpone a recession. And then it was due to fall in Trump's lap. And Trump didn't want it to fall in his lap, in part because he was pursuing policies he wanted, like tariffs, and didn't want tariffs to be blamed for a sudden recession. And so the question is, does this mean we've skipped a recession, which you never get to do? Or does it mean that a recession is due a quarter from now or 2 quarters from now? And we don't know. So Maheen, do you follow this? Do you have any thoughts on what this adds up to for the innovation economy, for young companies in digital health, for investors who back them, and also for that matter, for just innovators in healthcare in general? What's the picture that's painted here?
Thank you very much for giving a very good summary. I think you're right on the money that I personally think recession is coming. I don't think we can skip it, and that's what an economist would say. I think it's relatively good that we have economy that's growing. I have seen some very negative stuff happening in the past, and I feel like it's stabilizing a little bit better. And entrepreneurs like myself, because I'm a scientist, I'm not a financial person, so I don't follow this as closely as I should. But my team members are very good at it, so we do keep a close eye on it. And it's always nice to have someone on the team who has a better knowledge of this than you do. And it does show up in the investment world when you are talking to people. So it's always nice to have these numbers or have a brighter approach to what's out there so you can kind of align your asks according to what the environment is.
Yeah, and I'll add to that young companies, often young software companies building innovative technologies to sell into the big budgets of healthcare. That could be the hospital CIO budget, or it could be the pharma commercial budget, or the pharma clinical budget, or some other budget. So VCs pay very close attention to those budgets. And is pharma spending more on clinical trial automation software? The VCs would care a lot about that. Or our hospital CFOs spending more on cybersecurity for hospitals. VCs care a lot about that, and they would love to fund a company that's selling into an area where there's a lot of new pain and a lot of new spending by these big budgets on that area. And what recessions do is they cause all of those budgets to just be cut back,
Mm-hmm.
and that in turn causes VCs to say, well, for the next year or so, you're just not as certain. Will I back a company that can sell into into an enterprise software budget where there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of cash by that software, by that enterprise buyer to buy that software. And during a recession, old certainties are thrown into uncertainty, or people just wait and push off into the future decisions, and so that's that. So things are just tougher in general. So,
Yeah,
well,
it's uncertain, right? And the ROI is not very good. So, and I think every time we talk to VCs or they're looking at all these different hospitals and environments and budgets, when you have a recession, everything that was really innovative and had like literally frills is all gone. And you end up doing some very, very basic work. And you have to reestablish what the needs are and really focus on innovation that is answering basic needs rather than all the frivolous stuff that you were doing before.
and for our audience, by the way, feel free to comment on any macro stats you follow, or ask us questions about what we're seeing in the innovation economy based on the macro conditions. So now moving on to our next topic, it's about politics, government policy, government funding. This is a much bigger topic now than it was just 6 months ago. And I reflect on, I live in the Boston area, and I know some people who have the most astonishing education in biology, pedigrees in biology. We're talking about, 1 degree from Harvard and 1 degree from MIT, and working at some biology research institute that's world famous. And what I'm hearing in that world is that it is the worst job market ever in Boston's biology environment, and that grants are getting cut, and that that what they want is, they want, if they hire anybody, they want someone who's mid-career, who's very competent, who can act on their own, because they're not going to get support. They can't have a normal pyramid structure of hiring where they're hiring a lot of young people at the beginning of their careers and giving them exposure. All that's gone because they can't carry those people. They just need people who can get work done. But really, things are frozen. There's hiring freezes, and also you have people who have three advanced degrees who spend all their time thinking about how to write grant proposals. And they used to spend all their time figuring out how to put the word Harvard into every grant proposal that they were writing. And now they're spending their time figuring out how to take the word Harvard out of every grant proposal that they're writing. And so that's an update on. And now this is mostly bad for what government funds academia to do is basic research. And this is mostly bad for basic research, but it also represents what might be, if we try to find a silver lining here, that there might be a silver lining in that this is a shakeup of what gets funded. And so there might have been too much comfort in what was funded in the past, too many networks where government funds the same people has been funding for 30 years. Meanwhile, a genius doing something new in academia doesn't get any government funding. It has to leave, but someone who's been good at getting government funding for 35 years continues to get a lot of government funding. And that's being shaken up by RFK and by Trump. Maybe something like that is due every 10 or 20 years. But what is definitely concerning is that this shakeup in funding of basic research, there's new areas getting funding, but they won't produce commercializable results for over 5 years probably. And so you might have a new approach to Alzheimer's, old approaches being abandoned, new approaches being funded, but we're not going to see commercializable results for 5 years or longer. And so people who are in the business of commercializing results that come out of academia are going to find this big gap for years, I think, because shifting priorities to new areas doesn't just get you commercializable results rapidly in new areas. It gives you a long lead time in those new areas. So that's what we're seeing here in Boston. But Maheen, can you tell me what you're seeing in the world of that's affecting you?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of changes with this one big beautiful bill. But more than other bills, I'm getting people who ought to be able to know what the words in the bill mean, but they're saying, I don't know what the words in the bill will really mean. But can you tell us what you're hearing and seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very interesting perspective on this because I work for and with the federal government, and the layoffs have been intense. We've lost a lot of expertise, but there is a lot of hope, and we're bringing it back today. I don't know if you heard yesterday, there was a big thing that happened that Trump paused all of NIH research grants being given out, all of them. And there was so much, concern about that by the evening of last night, they had to retract what they did. I'm currently at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Toronto, and I was at the NIH booths because I know the people there and I work with them. And it is quite intense what his government is doing. What is happening is, and I know that you said the shakeup is good. Say shakeup is always good because the rich do get richer, right? The people who know how to write grants, one grant begets another grant. However, what happens with something like this is that you have an agenda and you have a scientific political agenda. So the research that gets funded is being skewed in a certain way. And the thing that makes science what science is that it's applicable to everyone and it has the freedom of speech, and you can research what is really important in terms of what the need is. So I think that is it may be a silver lining, but at the same time, it does skew where scientists are going. There is very little funding available. Lots of people are applying for a lot of grants. So, in terms of what grants were coming out, say last year, they would be from the government, they would give out 35 awards. They're now giving out 5 awards. So, the number of scientists are the same, and all of us are applying. So, all of us are going to be brilliant. All of us are going to do great work. But it's literally a crapshoot on who gets funded and who doesn't. And it's quite depressing. People are moving funds around in order to keep their staff. People are also working very hard to keep everyone's jobs. And there is a lot of camaraderie, and that is very satisfying. Within the scientific community, there's a lot of camaraderie in terms of helping each other. The leaders are actually standing up and fighting, and standing up for the science and how we are working in terms of people are going to private funders, people are going to pharma, people are going to international grants. And also, many of the grants that have been canceled because of what they were studying, particularly in certain political nature. And in particular, any grant that has a foreign award from the NIH, because NIH it's a leading research institute in the world, so it funds a lot of very important projects all around the world. So they have been also the foreign awards have also been adjusted so that things have changed there. So there's been a lot of changes, and it's hard to keep up with them. But it's almost like watching a TV show. You know how, political TV show, or like running around the corridors and getting news and doing this and doing that. And in a way, it does make you stand on your toes and work really hard at things that you never really would be, because you were taking things for granted. And now it's like there's a lot going on.
Really interesting. So, and the one big beautiful bill was passed, and how has that affected researchers in general? Do you think?
I think just the fact that there is a lot of changes in what we can and what we cannot study. The words we use have changed, which is, every government has their rules. And so we have to shift from what we were doing in terms of how we say things. It's also very important that we have to get a lot of approvals for things. There's a lot more red tape, and we have to do a lot more with a lot less. So the lean process has become really, really lean. So you end up, like you said, people who were doing one job are not doing like three jobs. So because there's a lot of people, not only were there layoffs, but people actually took what's called deferred retirement, or people left because they were scared that they would lose their jobs. It really has provided a way of, I mean, I never thought that I would be coming up with the kind of solutions to the challenges, because I never faced those challenges before. But now I'm coming up with ways to keep my people and to keep working and keep pushing forward. And again, it forces you to really understand what the need is. So there was fancy research that was being done, but now you have to really understand what the need is and focus on that, because that's what you will get funded for. There's a lot of, you were talking about what's important right now is a lot of pharma companies are using AI to understand response to treatment as well as prediction. That is really, really big right now. And at the conference as well, every conference you go to, there's a lot of AI, but I don't think of AI as just AI. I think of AI integrated with patient care, which involves a lot of human interaction. And that is why I think there's a little bit of a delay in adaptation of AI in healthcare as opposed to other fields, is because the human factor is quite big in it. So I think there are certain things that the government is really interested in, and I think they will be pushing forward. I think aging is on their agenda. I think Alzheimer's disease is on their agenda. And I think women's health is also on their agenda. There are certain things that they are very interested in. And I'm glad that I do all of them. So I have hope.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to move on a little bit, and to our audience, feel free to throw in questions about government policy and some of the announcements that we've seen lately. So now we're going to move on to a little bit about the environment for fundraising, IPOs, consolidation. And so here, first of all, we are in the middle of the lazy weeks of summer. And so we're not getting a lot of clear signal from Wall Street for action now, or what it will be like come September. That's not clear. But I'll say the first thing is that the IPO window from the winter to the spring was much stronger than expected. And I think nobody expected that some of the leading IPOs would be digital health IPOs. We thought that there would be huge tech IPOs or huge healthcare IPOs, and this would open the window for all, including little digital health companies. But instead, we saw the IPOs of Hinge, which went well, Omada less well, but it seems like good enough. And then, to my surprise, what I found is that there have been 199 IPOs It's now July, so since January, and that's up 80% over the same period in 2024, according to Perplexity. That's great. And so I also remember that on the All In podcast, one of the participants declared that the IPO window was open a few weeks ago. All that is good news. This also led to Maven, a digital health company, filing an S1. And there's also rumors that Aledade, Datavant, Transcarent, and Virta, want to as well. But we didn't see them follow fast after Hinge and Omada. That could mean they're gearing up for the fall. But if we did see 3 or 4 big digital health unicorns go out, that would be the biggest thing to happen in the fundraising market in digital health in years, and it contributes to a successful food chain. So what happens is investors who've been in for 10 years or more will finally be able to harvest in the public markets their investment and then decide if they want to put it back into early stage funds in digital health to do it all over again. And digital health has a problem of not enough exits, many unicorns that have not seen exits. And so we really want to see the IPO window stay open, and we really want to see more digital health companies go out. And we want to see those companies, we don't know because they're private, we want to see them be high growth and high margin companies. That's easier said than done for any
Yes.
entrepreneur. And then usually if they're high growth, high margin, then they're well received. And high margin usually means gross margin. So they can even be money losing on a net margin basis, as long as they have a plan to get to be cash flow positive within a couple of years. And we really want to see that, and that's been much delayed, and it's the lack of successful exits has cast a pall over the whole sector and has caused big allocators of capital to allocate away from venture. And so there's 2 reasons they're allocating away from venture. One is that interest rates are relatively high, and so if you can get government bonds at 5% and corporate bonds at 10%, why would you lock your money away in a venture fund for 7 to 12 years? That's illiquid and opaque, and you don't know if you're going to equal, a 10% return in that fund, annualized return. And then also, if digital health as a sector doesn't yield good exits over time, then capital allocators will allocate away from digital health and go into something else instead. Nuclear energy, who knows what.
Right.
And so that's a big question that will be resolved in people's minds based on what happens with this IPO market in the near future. And then early stage fundraising, I have seen fewer deals announced, and we have some data about that as well. And I'm calling this the Trump pause, which is that Trump introduced so much uncertainty that the way that the kind of venture food chain works, and I alluded to this before, is that big healthcare enterprises, hospitals, health plans, pharma, they spend on tech to accomplish their agenda. If the environment changes dramatically, then they may have a new agenda or they may feel poorer. And if that happens, they spend less on the tech they were about to spend money on. And VCs notice this, and then they either allocate away from backing startups, software startups that sell into those budgets and pain points, or they just pause. And so if the VCs have the luxury of pausing, CEOs don't have the luxury of pausing, but they may have to pause anyway if the VCs are not cooperating. But CEOs, they don't have the luxury of pausing. They have to sell when they have to sell. They have to raise money when they have to raise money. And so we're in this Trump pause because people are investors are thinking that old themes work less well or aren't working, and new themes, they haven't figured them out and gotten comfortable with them yet. So that's the Trump pause. And so, but within that overall pause, AI is winning a lot of attention and is getting a lot of the share of investment. And that tends to mean generative AI that has new capabilities that weren't possible just 3 or 4 years ago, that's central to the product. And it tends to be in the administrative part of healthcare, which is a little counterintuitive because you think the value would be in the clinical part of healthcare. But this represents a certain caution on the part of investors and entrepreneurs, where they don't necessarily want to claim that generative AI is going to be making better diagnoses or care plans that something a physician would do. Instead, they want to say it's going to do paperwork automatically for you, bill better. There's no FDA blockage on that front. And Silicon Valley Bank just released a report where they said that AI fundraising within digital health is strong, whereas non-AI, that the overall trend for digital health fundraising is down this year. Within that, the AI segment is up dramatically, and the non-AI segment is down 20%. Um,
Mhm.
and they said that overall fundraising volumes are headed for their lowest level in 10 years. That may make sense. This is a category of venture, and that may make sense with rates higher now. And then also deal size is getting larger as well. And so that means that when you see numbers of amounts invested, it means that there's fewer companies are getting larger deal sizes of fundraisers. And they pointed to the average Series B deal size has increased to 40 million, and that certainly is a big Series B. And they reiterated that administrative tools for the front office and the back office are getting attention from VCs. That's sort of the sweet spot right now. That's an overview of the fundraising environment. Maheen, what are you seeing? Are you seeing also VCs being more cautious and slower, and are you seeing a slowdown in deal volume?
I love how you're doing this. I've never done your show before, and I've seen the videos of it that you posted, and I really enjoy listening to you bring up all these issues in a way that is very it's bite-sized. And I think it's important for people to really understand digital health also has it's slightly different than all the other med tech that we're doing, right? So there's device research and device tech, and then there's digital health. And there's pros and cons to both. Like for digital health, likely if you're not predicting diagnosis or if you're not doing anything like that, then you won't need FDA approval. So your lifespan is a little shorter to get revenue. But then at the same time, for the device, it's much longer. Some of the VCs have come into the healthcare market they are not from the healthcare market, so they come in from other markets. So their expectations of seeing revenue is very different than people who understand how healthcare is. So I think they're very cautious, and because of the environment and because everything is so uncertain, they don't want to take the risk. That said, it is also at the early startup age, which I am at, because I've raised funds from friends and family and angels and people. I'm now raising a pre-seed round. What is also really important is that this point, you have to have people who believe in you because they're looking at you as an entrepreneur and they're looking at you as your team. And they're going to put money in you because they believe in you. And I've been lucky enough to have that in my surroundings, in my advisors, and in my investors. And that can push you forward. But when you get to the VC part, it does become very complicated because they want to see revenue. They want to see, and they don't want to take the risk. So it is very it is negative and depressing all around, like the numbers that you said. But I think, again, AI is, like you said, is rising. And I just like to point out that AI is predictive or generative, or however you say it. It is important to include that in digital health. And that is why all the funding is very maybe rising in it. But at the same time, I always like to say that AI is doing shotgun driving. You are the driver. So any digital health company that is using AI has to, in my opinion, show to the VC that it has sustenance because it's the patient that they're taking care of, and they're adding all these AI as bells and whistles or maybe to help. I'd like to give the example, like in like 15 years ago when you came up with something like a solution for, say, reading an MRI scan. You would show it to the team, but you would not say that you're going to take over the radiologist's job. You will always say, we are going to assist, we are going to complement. And that is how I see AI. They are here to assist and complement and inform and maybe provide more evidence. But I am the driver, and I think that needs to be really honed in healthcare because human aspect to me is very, very important in patient care.
That's really interesting. And I host debates from time to time on topics like will AI replace your doctor? That's a favorite topic. And we've been debating that for years or so. And one of the common answers that comes up is that the essential role that the doctor will always play is the doctor is a human who takes responsibility because AI doesn't take responsibility. And so What do you do when you have two conflicting AIs and you need to make a decision today? What if you use the wrong AI? What if your AI is underperforming? Who's the responsible person who makes a decision to fix that situation? It's not the AI. At the end of the day, we want a human, we want someone who is responsible for what the nurse does, what the specialist doctor does, what the AI does, and we also actually want someone we can sue as well, and that's not an AI either. And so that's the essential role that is. It's someone, and so that's a good point. And so Michael in the audience has made a remark that this happened during the ACA period as well. Thank you, Michael. And I think he's talking about just the large amount of uncertainty where people are making bets on tech being a hot selling product 2 years out or 5 years out. And then when there's big changes going on in government priorities or industry capital allocation priorities, then the people who can just pause do pause, and that's like VCs pause or big corporate buyers pause, and then the poor, highly geared little startup that's rapidly building a product to meet a need, they can't pause, but they have to pause anyway because the big players are pausing. So thank you, Michael. But so then I'll move on to some other trade journal news. So for our audience, feel free to bring up any trade journal stories, throw them in the chat that you want us to react to. But I'll mention that San Francisco-based Arbital Health, which was only founded a year ago, just raised 31 million for an AI platform for managing value-based contracts. So that's really interesting. And the value-based contracts software companies in general as a category are not that old. And here it's being reinvented, this time by a company that's building from scratch a Gen AI platform to address the same issues. So that's an example of the disruptors being disrupted. And it's also an example of generative AI getting a lot of attention in today's environment. And it points the spotlight at value-based contracts, because this is an area that Obama promised us would grow rapidly, but which were then kind of stalled under the first Trump administration. And so there's definitely a market there, but is this going to be a fast-growing market displacing with value-based displacing fee for service? I don't know. I'd love to hear someone's view on that. And then another fundraise is Ambience Healthcare, which is an ambient AI documentation company. That is the hottest sector in digital health right now, with Codametrics and other companies in that sector. Ambient means that you have an AI agent listening to the doctor-patient conversation and also talking to the doctor alone afterward. And they raised a $243 million Series C funding round led by Oak and Andreessen Horowitz, with follow-on from existing investors, OpenAI, Minor Perkins, and Optum Ventures. This is a who's who of the
Exactly.
most pedigreed funds in all of digital health. And Town Hall Ventures and Frist Cressy, that's Bill Frist in Frist Cressy, and they do ambient AI documentation, coding, and clinical workflow that integrates into the EMR. And Andreessen Horowitz's investor, Julie Yu, stressed that Ambience is building a true platform of products in a space that's crowded with point solutions. So this is a classic important strategy, is that someone raises enough money to move from being a point solution to a suite with a platform. And then many of the point solutions can't pull this off. They can't follow that. They can't raise the money. They can't add creative, winning new products in different product categories. And so this is evidence that, and then once a few companies make this jump, the door is often shut for other
Right.
companies to make this jump, because who wants to a year later throw $200 million at a company when there's already some winners who've raised that money and built it? So that's what's going on in this world of ambient AI documentation. And both of these fundraisers are directly, there weren't that many fundraisers launched in the last several days, and both of these are directly in the sweet spot that we just brought up. So, Maheen, any thoughts on these or other trade journal news?
I mean, one of the things that I've followed on the ambient is that, the every doctor you talk to when is incredibly upset about how much time it takes for them to take notes and how it's a huge need. And for them to actually go and do this and raise the money the way they did, it's incredible. What Another thing that's happening a lot in terms of this AI world in the healthcare is that there is understanding that when you have data from an individual, in order for you to predict how the data is going to behave, you use a lot of the data from the past patients, lots of other patients, and you have an aggregate of patients, and then you look at how they performed, normalized by age, normalized by education, and then you predict the person. Now, what people are doing, there are some companies that are actually creating a person's own normative data throughout lifespan. So it's like comparing your left hemisphere of the brain to the right hemisphere of the brain. So they're doing their own normative data, kind of like creating your own twin, and then they're able to predict. So that's like the next best thing that's happening in healthcare data setup, and I think that would really revolutionize the healthcare industry in terms of AI.
Yeah, and so by the way, this sector that we're talking about, which is the sweet spot right now of software company development and venture investment, which is ambient AI documentation. This sector, so one of the most remarkable things about this is that it has been an easy sell to CFOs to buy it and an easy sell to clinicians to use it. And that's almost never true of healthcare software. If you think about it, the federal government had to drop a $40 billion bribe on hospitals to buy EMRs and then condition it on the meaningful use of EMRs because they knew the hospitals would buy it and not use it. And so they conditioned the money on the use of EMRs. And so this is a sector where the buyers are bad at buying and don't like to buy, and the users don't like to use. And that's been true forever. And with this new category, we're seeing fast organic growth and uptake by hospitals and physicians, and that's very unusual. And so that shows that there's something real here. And so Sergey in our audience mentions, what if Epic introduces ambient AI for documentation and billing in the next 6 to 12 months and charges $20 per month as they promised? So that's very interesting. How are Ambience and Abridge and Codemetrics are two other important companies in this space. How will they compete? Not to mention AI tourists, which is the majority of the AI scribe market. So really good question, Sergey. And obviously we have the top venture funds in the US. They can't back Epic, but they're making bets on the competitors to Epic. And there's even a story here. People are scratching their heads at how these valuations are so high, multi-billion-dollar valuations, and how these fundraisers are so big in this area, which is a sort of a back office area. And what VCs will tell you to back that up is that provider organizations are unhappy with Epic, Cerner, Athena, and other vendors, and that these new companies, Abridge, Ambience, Codemetrics, they are not merely revenue cycle management billing companies working on workflow automation and billing automation, but they're also a way to get in and change the EMR sector in its entirety. So medical records, revenue cycle management, the whole large super category, which is what would justify these kinds of valuations. But Sergey, it's a really good question, and I think you could say that it's Epic's market to lose. So Epic has been behaving, I think, like an incumbent that doesn't want to change. And in most markets, that means they can be overthrown by the challengers in US software markets. But in healthcare, it's a little bit harder because once you're in with companies, it's very hard to get hospitals to change and to do a rip and replace. But I think it's Epic's market to lose. And companies like Epic are actually famous for injecting fear, uncertainty, and doubt into innovation markets by saying that they'll do that and then not delivering. So we'll
They're
see.
very, very, very stiff. They're very stiff.
Absolutely.
They're not very plastic to change at all. So, and that could be through their detriment because even hospitals are more adaptive now. So there's more innovation and there's more, especially in the clinical space, that's happening with doctors. And one thing you had mentioned earlier about how VCs are looking at certain areas in the hospital, like what the needs are. And is CSI, is huge, but like looking at, all the regulatory stuff or the personal health information delivery or neglect. So every hospital wants shorter stays. And so neglect is a really big deal in the hospital or in nursing homes or in long-term stays at SNFs. And so these are the things that the hospitals are really worried about. And then the clinician is worried about, saving time writing notes. So there's like different people that are interested in terms of provider, what they want and how they can be better help to the patient as well as the caregiver.
Thank you. Well, so now we're going to skip a couple sections to go forward, and just one of our audience favorites is the use of a technology in your life that has improved your quality of life. And so I think I'm going to mention voice for Gen AI app on your phone. So this is like ChatGPT has excellent voice, and Grok has excellent voice. And I think we heard Sam Altman said that his vision of the future of ChatGPT is that you interact with it primarily by voice. And I didn't like this initially for a number of reasons. It's inconvenient to set it up, to get it going. It is slightly slower than text, I find, and it gives shorter answers, whereas text will give you a 7 point outline very quickly on your screen, but you wouldn't expect ChatGPT voice to tell you 7 points in a row. And if it did, you'd have trouble following it probably. And so I didn't like it initially, but increasingly I do like this, and I like it. It's so helpful. It's very different, I think, than even the same product text version, but it's so useful. I actually think that the phone may be the wrong medium for it, that we may be in store for that vision that some people have made attempts of the electronic device the size of a pager that clips to your shirt or your pocket or something, and that stays on all the time. It has a different, it doesn't have a screen, has a different battery system than your phone. So that's what I'll throw out there, is talking to your phone in certain contexts, like when you're walking or driving or doing something else, and not in front of a high quality screen environment. So that's what I'll throw out there. Oh, I see also Michael in the comments has just said, and Epic puts first right of refusal in their contracts for innovative areas. That's true. So so a lot of young startups have to work with Epic somehow, and then when they do, they give Epic a first right of refusal. So Epic has some sort of leverage over startups in this space. So Maheen, do you any thoughts or?
I actually have a very interesting thing to say to you because of your the chat GPT. Because when I started studying neuroscience, and one of the things that I learned is that there are a lot of researchers in vision neuroscience, but there are very few research in the and like auditory cortex. So visual cortex gets a lot of, it's much larger representation in the brain than the auditory. And when you listen to certain things, it's difficult for you to remember it based on your working memory. The old saying is that plus and five plus and minus two, word things that you can remember. But when it's visual, it's easier for you to see it because it's in front of you. So it's a remembering. And I think the sound, when it started, because I have an accent, it couldn't understand what I was saying, but now it has improved so much that it has really been very, very helpful in, especially as you get older, you don't type as fast because your processing speed gets lowered. You also your eyes are fatigued easier. ChatGPT is really, really helpful. I agree with you on that.
And I'll throw out there that 2 years ago, Google did a demo that wowed its developer audience, and the demo was that they had the voice of an AI agent. And so 2 years ago is a long time in AI and in voice tech.
It is.
And so it was a AI agent, which was
Yes.
much more limited back then than it would be today. But it could place an ordinary phone call to a restaurant, and it could look up someone's calendar. So this was Google doing this. So maybe you keep your calendar in Google, for example.
Yeah.
Look up your calendar, call a restaurant, make a reservation, and as a sophisticated person with a perfect audio environment, you could tell it was an AI agent's voice, but you could barely tell.
Hmm.
The reason I mention that is that in the subsequent 2 years, it's gotten so much better. The voice is not as robotic anymore. The voice
Oh,
can
yeah.
have emotion in it. It can give you an emotionally appropriate response instantly. So really interesting, and it's just gotten better.
Much better. Yes, yes.
Well, so, and then do you have a tech for our audience that has improved your life?
I actually wanted to bring up two things. One is, as a woman, I wanted to bring up tech that is useful for women. The Apple Watch, you can actually measure your cycle. You can see how it'll help you not just with your fertility, but actually navigate things like menopause, which is a very big deal these days. There's a lot of research that's been going on in that. So that tech is really helpful to women to be able to monitor where they are in their cycle. The other tech that's important, it's not particularly tech, it's more about understanding what things to use for your health again. The more and more research that's coming out of hormone replacement therapy, and a lot of it is also based on understanding your health from a monitoring perspective and using AI to understand it. There's a lot of companies that are working on that. They're working on charting data from everyday monitoring and then helping you with whether you need to go on hormone replacement therapy or not. So there's even if you're using pharmacological, there's a huge component of technology in it that's helping live better lives.
Really interesting. Thank you. So next we'll move on to personal notices. So this is a chance for our audience to interact with you. And so I'll just mention that for our Boston audience, I am hosting a soiree, no less. I'm hosting a soiree tomorrow in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the Charles River. We have Stephen Wolfram coming and talking to our audience. So Stephen Wolfram is a lifetime AI researcher who created Mathematica, which is the math software program that many people who've taken math tracks in college and university have learned computer math on. And he also created Wolfram Alpha, which was an AI search engine. And most recently, he has become sort of a sage on modern AI. And so he's presenting a thesis on a computational model for the future of medicine tomorrow in Cambridge, 5:30 to 8:30. And so send me an email if you'd like to attend this event. It's going to be at the Charles River Yacht Club tomorrow. So and then on August 30th, I'm hosting the 5th annual Longevity Beach Party in Boston. This will be in Marblehead, and we're bringing together innovators and company leaders and investors in longevity tech and longevity biotech together for a beach party. So those are some events. Send me an email if you're interested in attending those. And Maheen, do you have any personal notices or upcoming events that you want to give notice of to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I am currently, as I mentioned earlier, I am actually at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, which is quite huge actually in Toronto, and learning a lot and meeting some really incredible researchers and seeing the progress that is being made internationally. I am also doing a podcast, another one. It would be with the Neuroplasticity Group, and it will be in September. There are a couple of other conferences. One big conference that I always go to is Society for Neuroscience. If you are interested in not just the neuroscience, basic neuroscience, but translational neuroscience, looking at devices that are coming out or digital health that is being used for a lot of different, not just monitoring health, but also looking at response to treatment for a lot of drug studies. And yeah, so I think those are some of the ones and if you follow me on LinkedIn, then you'll see what else I am doing and focusing on.
That's great. Thank you. So now we move to the second half of our show, which is about consumer tech, revolutionizing care. So we've seen therapeutic video games for kids with ADHD, also giving voice to people who have lost the ability to speak, preventing nightmares, predicting heart attacks. There's a new wave of consumer grade ability to measure the body, and this is giving us new ways to understand diagnoses and care. And so I wanted to sort of kick it off with some very interesting new things, which is that the one sensor that has been underutilized, but which is coming to fruition now, is the smartphone camera. And so it turns out we can measure all sorts of things about the body using the smartphone camera. And perhaps unexpectedly, it doesn't have to be just a smartphone, it could be your webcam as well. We're increasingly having our cameras and our webcams look at our faces on a nearly daily basis. And so this could be tied into health. So to give just one example, with the smartphone camera pointed to the face, you can measure heart rate. You can get some measurements of blood pressure. Now, not all of these are approved by the FDA. These would be first clinical consumer grade applications, which then if they are truly borne out, you could have clinical grade versions of them later. You can get pupil dilation, eye tremor, body tremor, and You can measure the health of your skin, among other things. And so those are examples of what you can get from the iPhone camera. And the camera keeps getting better and higher resolution and have more capabilities like LiDAR capabilities. But that's just one example. And so you marinate in this sector and you have a company in this sector. Can you tell us about some of the enabling technologies that you use or that you've seen that consumer products builders and clinicians have increasingly at their fingertips?
Absolutely. I think this is a best part of, talking about this is that I think one of the things when you say enabling, it really helps when you have had experience of watching someone lose their ability to do whatever you just mentioned. So if you lose your ability to communicate, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your caregiver, it affects your entire family, it affects everybody. And it creates a vacuum in your life before the person even passes away. And I think that's what happened with me. And that's why I created my company, Soof Solutions. And I did a faculty fellowship at Stanford at the biodesign. And at that time, I was also doing my master's at Brown University. And the company actually uses the eye tracking that is available in an Apple iPad. It can measure a lot of things, like you said, it can measure head movements, it can measure saccades and pupil movements and all that. But what we did was we reversed it. We used it to capture stimuli that we display on the screen so that if someone is wanting a glass of water, like my father did, they can actually use their eyes to choose that stimulus or that whatever picture on the iPad, and it gets chosen and it goes from the iPad to my mother's phone. So my mother would know that my father wanted a glass of water. So not only is there communication that happens, you also immediately interact with the caregiver or the provider. And something that is known as neglect, which is common in hospital areas, that you can actually measure it and say that their needs have been met. Now, all of this is at the same time recording your eye movements, it's recording your head movements. And that's one of the things that you had just mentioned, but I wanted to add that because head movements are really important. They're very important in certain cultures, but they're also very important in when you are awake, when you're moving your head in a certain way, and every day you do it in a certain way. And then what if you have a seizure? What if you're having a stroke and your head is tilted in a certain way? And if you're using a device or using an app that actually can measure that and can show that yes, your behavior of your head movements is not the same today as it was yesterday. So deviations from the norms are going to be captured. Same thing, not with just head movements, but with the skin temperature, with your eye expressions, with your mouth expressions. All of these things can be measured. And we are living in an environment where people are retiring later and later, and we have to be very cognizant of what we're doing. We have to be cognitively very advanced and be there. And I think it's really important to have these apps surround you so that in a way you can kind of monitor your own cognitive reserve and your own cognitive skills, because I think humans are much better at what's called biofeedback than anything else. So I think that these biometrics that we get for ourselves are actually very helpful for a better quality of life for ourselves as well.
So that's interesting. You mentioned body temperature, facial temperature. And so I think we expect to see simple temperature from our devices, from a ring or from a wristband, an activity tracker will measure our temperature. And that's coming. It's in some of the more advanced and expensive devices. It's coming to more devices as those sensors. Over time, the number of sensors is increasing and the cost of sensors is going down. But I didn't think of something that what you said made me think of that we know that people have iPhone cameras and webcams, and we know that there are temperature sensing cameras. And so in the future, you may see temperature sensing built into phones as well. And today, LiDAR is increasingly being built into phones, so it can measure the geography of your face. But you may also see a temperature a camera built into your phones. And so that could do things like fever prediction. And so you look at your phone several times a day. Some people open their phone more than 100 times a day, and it would notice if you have an illness coming on, for example.
Right. One
Um,
of
and
the other thing is anxiety. So the sweat glands and the that can actually be captured with the facial camera if that's possible. Like the capillaries widen and all of that. And depression, looking at facial expressions and eye movements, these are things that people can actually, I mean, one of the things that I know that a long time ago I would go to for a facial, and I think it was in Seoul in Korea, and they did a skin analysis. They took a picture and they could see how many different layers and where I needed the work. It was very interesting, but it was a while ago. But so much you can do, and we just have to make sure that we don't get too drawn into the details of it and actually do it so that it serves a purpose rather than just, ooh, this is great.
And so when I pick up my smartphone and I turn it toward my face, the smartphone knows it has been turned toward my face. It makes an attempt to look at my face and open up. And that's because it has a gyroscope inside of it, or I'm sorry, an accelerometer inside of it. But this is also now being used to detect car crashes. So there's a certain accelerometer pattern you would get in a serious car crash, and then to call 911, and also for falls. So falls are a big issue with seniors. Seniors increasingly have smartphones. They might have it on their person. And so the fall of a phone in a person has a different signature than a non-fall or than the dropping of a phone on the floor. And so that could also call emergency services as well. And then another one that I've heard that's really interesting is what I'll call response time to peers. And so there have been a number of papers published on this, but if you are a heavy user of email with your peers in this case usually means personal friends, or a heavy user of text with your peers, it turns out that if you are subject to depressive episodes and you have a depressive episode, you will often suddenly take much longer to respond to your friends. So you like it when Jim texts you and you get back to him, but now you're feeling depressed this morning, and so Jim has texted, and so you don't respond to him or to your other 10 most contacted friends as well. And so those are very interesting sensors that can be used in.
Right.
Uh,
There is There is something else, which is, I don't know if you can do it with a camera. And one of the biggest issues about texting is that there's no emotion involved in it. With all of the emojis that are out there, you never can get across the meaning that you want. And there has to be a way of AI to figure out, probably individually, and there's going to be huge sex differences here, that would actually learn from the pattern whether the saying everything is fine doesn't actually mean everything is fine. And that could be tabulated with certain hours of the day, because a lot of people have cyclic depression. And so those, I think, understanding emoticons and emotions from the actual arrangement of words is another thing AI can really help with.
and you mentioned the Apple Watch tracking a menstrual cycle. So it can do that because a woman knows dates and enters dates,
Right.
and also measure body temperature. Is that right? Or what are other ways that it is?
I think it can. I haven't done it. There's also the heart rate, and then you also can put in your own information in there about, it asks like when you actually first started, and what the daily and all that. So the more information you give it, the better, the more accuracy there is. Obviously, that's how data works. But just to have it in the sense that, especially for younger women who are trying to get pregnant and have fertility issues, this is huge.
So another area is we've seen with activity trackers, we've seen in the last few years the popularization of SpO2 measurements. So this is blood oxygen saturation, and this can be a signal of poor lung function or poor sleep or other issues. And so that's interesting to see that sensor spread widely. And then there's talk of, I don't know how fast this is moving, but the measuring of sweat. And so this is sometimes called galvanic response.
Yes, GSR.
Touching your skin, measuring sweat. And this can measure your hydration level, your stress, and other things. So those are two sensors that seem to be moving through the
Right.
consumer ecosystem: SpO2 and sweat.
I think both of those have been in the market for quite a while, and now they're actually becoming have been in the scientific world for quite a while, and now they're becoming commercial, and they have a lot of potential. I think eye tracking is the next horizon because it also has similar kind of potential. As long as you can make the data interpretation a little bit easier for people to understand, I think it can take off. The GSR stuff that you were talking about is very interesting, because from the perspective of every time you talk to anyone who has general anxiety disorder, or anyone who has those physical symptoms of twitching and having the sweat, one of the things therapists always tell them is to learn how to control it, what to do so that you don't go into the big old adrenaline gland flow and all these hormones that are hitting your brain on the way back. So having that trigger on your phone to say you are getting into that yellow, orange, red zone is really important for healthy human beings to retract and do their exercises and learn from that biofeedback. I think that would be incredibly helpful for everybody. Like, they don't have to go to a injured population or stroke population to discover this. I mean, this would be very, very good for people to use every day, especially in children too.
So I also wanted to mention that just to dwell a little bit on the world of prescription digital therapeutics. So this is the world of Achille, which makes a video game for ADHD, and Pear, which went bankrupt actually, but which had a abstinence program for drug use. And but there's something that's almost magical about the world of prescription digital therapeutics that I'll get to in a moment. You have a case where a boy is acting up in school and is diagnosed with ADHD. And so the mother takes the boy to the doctor's office. The doctor has this decision moment shared with the mother of, should I prescribe Ritalin or should I prescribe perhaps Achilles game, software game for ADHD? And they may decide that they'd rather not use pills and serious medication, and they'd rather try the video game. And so when you just the product, this is what is so special about prescription digital therapeutics, is that so now the boy is actually prescribed like 40 minutes 5 times a week of playing a video game. And the video game, one of their games, forces you to win the game to focus on the most important issue while not being distracted by a secondary issue that will not determine whether you win the game or not. And so, but what's so special about this is that the software is a diagnosis tool, although they don't make claims about its diagnosis, but it can be a diagnosis tool. And the same software is also a monitoring tool. So it's used repeatedly over time. It becomes monitoring. And the same software also is a therapeutic tool that the child gets better and better over time at focusing on what matters to winning the game and ignoring the distraction that doesn't matter to winning the game. And it also becomes predictive as well. So it's the same software. And then it also perfectly tracks adherence. So, when you go back to the doctor needs to make a decision. Do I keep the same diagnosis, change the diagnosis? Do I keep the same care plan? Is the patient responding? Change the care plan? Do I increase the dose, decrease the dose, change the medication to something else? And then if it's Ritalin, the mom and boy go back into the doctor's office 3 months later, and the doctor says, "Did you take the pill?" And they say yes. And the question is, did they actually take the pill? And maybe they didn't. We're terrible at these things. We need a source of truth, not memory. They may feel bad. They may feel they have to say yes when they didn't actually. Adherence was probably less than 50%, but and then now the doctor is wondering, well, do I increase based on that? Do I increase the dose, decrease the dose, change the medication? The patient's not responding, and the truth was that adherence was less than 50%, and not only is that hard to make a decision if adherence is less than 50%, but the doctor doesn't even know the truth in this case. The patient's not responding because they didn't do the medication, not because the medication doesn't work.
Right, right.
And so now you have perfect measuring of adherence. And finally, you actually have boosting of adherence. So the kid's doing homework and the iPad alarm goes off, and it's the app, and the app is saying it's 5:15, it's time to play the video game. And so it's sort of magical that all of this is wrapped up. And of course, the kid's exact game behavior, that's the sensor in this case that is
Right.
measuring how well they're doing and how well they're improving. So this is using, I guess that would be the touch screen is now the sensor,
Exactly, exactly.
that's the console, that's the gaming console is the iPad touch screen.
So,
That becomes the
yeah,
software.
I mean, there's all kinds of different things that are coming to mind when you talk about this, because Soof Solutions is kind of like this, because are using it as a communication platform, but we're recording the data and we get monitoring and we can actually see if then things go wrong. And that in itself is a therapeutic because it grows with you and brings you back to your original state or whenever you were choosing a lot more of the stimuli and communicating better and then something happened and it so there are certain other prescription therapeutic solutions that are digital that are doing similar things. And I think that it's a very exciting time to do that. But there's a couple of things I wanted to point out. One is that a lot of it is being done in what's called virtual reality. So XR, which is combination of augmented reality, virtual reality, and it works really well with children and young adults because they're used to wearing those big VR headsets. And there's a lot of therapeutic stuff going on in there with ADHD, but also in stroke patients as well, so they can do their motor exercises in it. There's eye tracking that is being built in those VR headsets. But I think also it's limited because sometimes when you have changes in the brain, you really don't want to be wearing a big headset. So that ends up, so there's different ways of doing all these therapeutic. Like you can play the game on the iPad, you don't have to put on a VR headset, and you can the adherence thing is really, really important because I have a speech language pathologist on my team who basically said to me that every time I go, and sometimes I tell parents and children, give them homework, and I go back 2 weeks later and they've just put the iPad in the drawer and they haven't even taken it out. So there's like no way of them to communicate with the provider, and so you don't know whether there's any. I mean, kind of know that they're not doing it because they haven't looked at it. But at the same time, if there was any monitoring, that would really help. Because as a neuroscientist, I really don't believe in self-report measures because we all lie. We all lie.
So, well, thank you. And very interesting. So, by the way, I'll tell you a joke. I once worked for, well, it's not a joke, it's a funny story, but so I once worked for an employer, and the employer loved Fitbit when Fitbit was on the rise in the marketplace. And they just thought, we like this brand of Fitbit. We're a Fitbit kind of company. We're the kind of company that might do a walking meeting where people get their steps in and keep the meeting short and only say what's important because they're walking. And we're the kind of company that would do a health challenge. And so they had like marketing and sales had a competition with each other, and a number of people from marketing put on Fitbits, other people from sales put on Fitbits, and they had a leaderboard, and someone immediately emerged as the walking champ. And this guy just walked an incredible amount. And then a little later, he admitted that he put the Fitbit on his dog at night. So he was not doing after dinner walks. The dog was playing in the backyard with a Fitbit.
That's very funny. Yeah. Well, I know some people who would pull that prank.
He didn't realize it would make him the office champion immediately.
That's really funny.
And then another interesting example is that so there's many activity trackers. There's Ring and there's wrist-based activity trackers. And nearly all of them these days measure cardiorhythm variation, which is heart rate and a little more than heart rate.
Heart rate variability.
And so what's interesting is they all have to say they are clinical grade, and I'm sorry, they all have to say that they're consumer grade, and they're not
Exactly.
clinical grade.
Yeah.
And so this puts us in an unusual situation. And it's true that they don't get, the data is not as good, and the context is not the correct context. You need a very carefully controlled context for a clinician to be able to make a true diagnosis. But nevertheless, they have all this data. And they're not allowed to make any diagnosis based off of it. And so the irony is, and so that there's an agreed convention where if you're a 60-year-old man, you may have a heart condition that's undiagnosed. And so Fitbit, they could send you a message, irregularity detected, see your doctor. But there's no problem legally with saying that.
No, there isn't. Yeah.
But the irony is that Fitbit might know that you have a serious problem, and they know what the problem is,
Yeah.
and they can't tell you. And you would like to know that, and you would like to call them and ask them and have them tell you. And if you did, they couldn't tell you. They can tell you to see your doctor. They can't tell you what they see.
Well, yeah. It kind of reminds me of what we do in research when we do MRI scans. So if something comes up, it's in our consent form and we see it, we immediately tell you to contact your provider. because we did this as a research scan. We cannot tell you, even if your radiologist sees it. There's all these rules and regulations and personal health, all these that you just know, but you can't. Otherwise, you have to go through the process and take the claim that you're diagnosing something. It's a whole different level.
So, and then I'll just throw in, I think another sensor coming down the pike is measuring sunlight. So that's an interesting addition to, to our, to the list of sensors. And finally, I think that of all the sensors I've seen, I think the holy grail is going to be a cheap, consumer friendly blood pressure and continuous blood glucose level monitoring.
Yeah,
Those, we don't have those today, in the sense that with blood glucose, you could actually get a consumer friendly one. It has to prick your skin though. And I'm talking about maybe looking through your skin or looking through your eye or something like that to get to blood glucose without pricking your skin. And then blood pressure, you still need a cuff today, but we're getting toward the world of wearing a consumer device, a casual consumer device you want to wear at all times that gets you to high quality
right.
blood pressure levels.
I think there's one more thing that's coming down the pipeline, and that's the amount. So everything that we're measuring is measuring inside of the body. The other thing that you can think about, and this is something that is being pioneered, I think, at Stanford, is measuring what the environment is like that your body is exposed to, measuring exposure. So there's the exosome, the meter you can wear, so you could see how much of the what the air around you is doing. And this really affects you when you are traveling around the world, or if you're in a war zone or things like that. And, NASA has been collecting satellite data on what the air has been, past 20 years. And you can see when the Iraq war happened, you can see all the stuff that was in the air. And, it does affect your life later on. So that's another thing that could be measured, is what is coming inside your body.
That's really interesting. There have been cases where you have someone whose career was they were a truck driver, and the nature of being a truck driver was they sat in a left-hand drive truck,
Hmm.
and that meant that there was sun coming at them, often through an open window on this side of their face, but not on this side of their face. And they had very different skin health, worse skin health for the direct sun on the
Yeah,
left side of the face when they were elderly. And another example was that there was a man who was a farmer, and he ran tractors for decades, and tractors have mufflers that are not as good. They have engines that are smaller than the engines of cars, but
yeah.
they have mufflers that are much worse than the mufflers that go on cars. So you had this loud diesel tractor engine, and he was always turning his head to the right to look behind him at what his tractor was pulling something, and he was always turning his head to the right to look behind him to see what it was pulling and how that was going. And that meant, and the engine and muffler were in front of him, and that meant that his left ear was always exposed to loud diesel engines, and his right ear would simply
Hmm.
have the difference of having his head in between them. And this led to very different and much worse
Yeah.
ear health for his ear later in life. And so these environmental issues, especially
It's
if
very big, yeah. And they make your life very asymmetrical. And before we've been talking about so much about the environment and measuring what the body is. One of the things that I really do want to put pressure, and this is something that's actually going to be in your history sometime, and also in your family history, and can actually be put inside the healthcare AI model that your body is going to be, is your genetic component. And so your family history, but in terms of what your genetic susceptibility is to what diseases. And another thing is family history also means that, if you basically the GWAS or any kind of like big old human chromosome, all of that, and looking at what your family history is, because that makes you prone to certain things. So if you are, I always use this example that if you're colorblind, and your boss knows it, they're not going to ask you to fly a plane. So your occupation should be designed according to what your capabilities are. So genetic monitoring and all of that, like you want to know what to monitor for if you know that you are genetically susceptible to it.
before we wind down, I just want to ask you about the regulatory environment. What have you seen? Are there changes in the regulatory environment? And when we set up this show, there's a development that's happened just since we initially set up this show, which is that Whoop, which is the modern Fitbit, they make an activity tracker that's a best-selling activity tracker, and they are walking this line between the consumer grade device and the clinical grade device, and they're a consumer grade device. They have been offering an estimate of blood pressure and blood pressure insights using a consumer grade device that apparently provides a systolic and diastolic blood pressure estimate every day. And the FDA has just wrote them a letter saying, stop, this qualifies as a medical device, and you did not do the medical device things, which is prior notification of the FDA, F10 clearance, pre-market approval. You didn't do these things, and at Whoop, I'm sure they're very sophisticated, and Whoop has responded to this saying that this is a general wellness feature and is not for use in diagnosis or the management of disease. And that's what you'd expect them to respond, but they're walking this line that we're talking
Is
about where the consumer grade sensors are out there and there's more of them, they're more capable, they're cheaper,
yeah,
consumers want them, and yet you don't always want to go to market as a clinical grade FDA cleared device.
I feel for them.
So any thoughts about the changing
Yes.
regulatory environment?
I mean, I know that the 5OK and whatever that is to speed up the devices to get better FDA approval faster has been put in, and I think that would be really helpful. But the line that you're talking about, my own company can be at that particular juncture as well, right? Because you've got the clinical and you've got the consumer grade, and you're walking that fine line. Now, I mean, I agree with them that this is just additional information, but there's something that is kind of striking about this. I would not use the terms that the clinicians use if you are going consumer. That's the key here. You need to come up with some kind of a layman term that people can understand easily and not use the clinician terms, because the minute you use the clinician terms, you evoke all those like, oh, this is what they're saying, must be true, because the consumer means that you have to make it very, very layman. So I think that would be my way of doing it, and then FDA can say, okay, so this is just not the clinician. Now, that could be the way you could actually divide the two, because otherwise FDA is not going to, like, if I say I can detect stroke because of your head movement and because of your eye movement, I better back it up with a lot of evidence that I can detect stroke. But I don't want to do that. I want to choose my words really carefully because I do not have the evidence for it. That is clinically diagnosed rating from a clinician.
Interesting. Thanks. Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to think about is that if you're on the consumer and the wellness side and you're not making medical claims, how do you develop a language that consumers accept and want to hear that's useful to them and offer them a benefit without treading into into without, because you're not clinical grade and you don't want to be clinical grade or subject to the FDA, and so you need a language that will help
Yeah.
consumers. It doesn't put you into that territory.
And I think that language is an interesting word to use here. It doesn't have to be a language that is word based. It could be a language that is visual based. It could be a bar that shows you're getting into that danger zone. Obviously you'll have all the writing up front that whatever we say is not clinically determined. So there's a lot, it is up to you. It is your responsibility to go to your provider after you see yourself in an orange zone or whatever. So you can save yourself on that. But I personally think that staying away from clinical terms when you don't have an MD on your team that is reading the data is the best thing to do. I mean, again, it's like save yourself, save the patient, just to be risk free.
That's great. Well, thank you. So, any final thoughts for our audience on the topic of how consumer tech is revolutionizing care?
I think consumer tech needs, I think it's doing wonderful. I think we just need to convince VCs to put more money into it and have some more success stories. Because at the end of the day, however you raise money is, like my advisor always says, always be raising. However you raise, there are platforms that are helping startup companies, like the Start Engine that is doing a really good job helping the startup companies raise money. There's other kinds of different family friends and all that. But I think really getting out there and understanding what the need is, and then not getting discouraged. Just not getting discouraged is really the key here. And I hope that people who are listening can follow my LinkedIn and look at my company as well as it's growing, and as I hope that we are one of the success stories that get covered on your statistics sometime soon.
Well, so you've been listening to the Digital Health Investor Talk show with host Stephen Wardell. And many thanks to our guest, Maheen Adamson, the CEO of Soof Solutions. Thank you, Maheen.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be publishing this show as an episode of the Digital Health Investor Talk podcast on Apple and Spotify. Don't forget to listen and rate and review. And coming up, our next show is on August 13th with Alex Fair on using crowdfunding and competitions for fundraising. And then for our Boston audience, we are having a longevity tech beach party coming up Saturday, August 30th in Marblehead. And email me for details. So, and thank you. Thank you, Maheen.
Thank you very much.